Hello and welcome to another session. I am joined today by Cheryl Toth. She is a leadership coach with ACG Practice Partners. Thanks for joining me today, Tothy.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here and talk about leadership.
We love to talk about all things related to leadership. And so I'm just going to dive right in. And, one of the topics that comes up that I find is commonly misunderstood or confused in practices is talking about leadership versus management. So
Mm.
I'd love to start there. Can tell us a little bit about what is leadership and how is that different from management?
I think that's a great opening question because you're right. People do equate the two in many cases, and they are definitely different. And I think that the easiest way to start is to say what leadership isn't. It isn't tactical. It isn't operational. It's not creating protocols and managing the P&L. I mean, you obviously, if you're a leader, you're going to look at the P&L, but you're not going to be doing spreadsheets. And many times you're not going to be hiring people, maybe your manager, but not the frontline folks. So that's kind of the first step. Leadership is about developing people, developing teams, and developing the organization. So what good leaders do is create an environment for people to reach their potential, really.
Mm, I love
And
that.
when I think of the difference too, I think management is often a job, whereas leadership is a calling. I heard
Mhm.
that long ago from an executive coach that I worked with. And he said leadership is a calling, and it really is because it's not for everyone. And leaders aren't born, they're really made, by experience and personal growth and self-awareness, which is a big part of leadership. So yeah, I think that leadership being a calling where you're able to be vulnerable, build trust, and grow the organization and its people, that's leadership.
I love that. And I like that differentiation because that also suggests you can be a leader even if you're not the manager.
Correct. And the other thing is so often people think leadership and business, and in
Mhm.
this case, we're talking about aesthetic practices, but, you could be the leader of the local animal shelter. You could be the leader
Mhm.
of the board of your homeowners association. I mean, leadership in those instances is really the same as it is for in an aesthetic practice or a business environment because of all these qualities I'm talking about. It's really developing people, building
Mhm.
culture, developing a culture. I mean, we work a lot with our clients who say, they want to create a culture, a great patient experience. They want their team to have core values that
Mhm.
they believe in. Well, you've got to be a good leader to get people there.
Right. Well, I think you've kind of led into my next question, which is why are leadership skills important or why should they matter to an aesthetic practice owner, to a plastic surgeon or a med spa owner?
Well, I feel like leadership is important because truly, a failure in the organization is a failure of leadership.
Mm.
Can't blame your manager for something, even if directly they were involved, let's say, but you are the leader of the practice. It's your role to cultivate the managerial skills so that manager doesn't make a mistake, let's say, or have some sort of risk issue that occurs. And I think of this like that famous quote from President Harry S. Truman, which was the buck stops here. That was
Mhm.
on his desk. And it's true. Everything flows from leadership. So, um, the tough part is that practice leaders, surgeons have so many challenges in front of them, and balancing those and trying to really get to the leadership is a hard thing. But, if you're experiencing a lot of turnover, if you can't get your team to work effectively together, if you are having difficulties with the manager, that's a failure of leadership. And so building your leadership skills, that truly matters. It's an important thing for doctors to focus on.
Yeah. I recently had a conversation with a plastic surgeon who, the conversation was about something that was pretty operational and it was their membership program. And come to find out, a couple of the team members had been miscommunicating the details of the program to patients. And he was very frustrated. He says, I don't get it. And what did they not understand? I thought I was very clear. And then he paused and he said, but if they didn't understand, I have to own that because I'm the leader and I rolled it out, and clearly I didn't communicate it as well as I thought I did. And I told him I was so proud of him in that moment, that he, yes, I think we've all been in those situations where we think we put all the detail in place and we've been very clear on our expectations and the details, and the recipient doesn't receive it well. And that can go into communication and other things. But to say, ultimately the buck stops here, right?
Mhm.
This is my practice and this is my program. And if it's not being done correctly, then I have to take ownership for that.
I agree, and you mentioned communication. It is your responsibility as a leader to have good communication. I'm reminded of a surgeon that we work with that was unhappy with manager's performance and
Mhm.
just would go on about what this person wasn't doing to their specifications. Why aren't they doing this like they're supposed to? Well, then that surgeon would not meet with the manager to really flesh
Mhm.
through the issues, to ask questions, to find out the root of the problem, and ultimately let the person go without, ever having a conversation that was honest and vulnerable. And so it is true. The buck stops here with leadership of any kind. But as a surgeon, you've got to, when you're seeing these problems, these issues, like the surgeon you're mentioning,
Mhm.
you have to stop and think, hey, what's my role in this? And as a
Mhm.
leader, what can I do better? So again, we go back to what your question was, is why does leadership matter? Building and developing those leadership skills for surgeons is a critical part of just, in many ways, holding the practice together.
Exactly. So, what does make a good leader? What are some of the qualities of a good leader?
Well, when I think about good leadership, the first thing that comes to mind, I always say that this is step one in good leadership, is self awareness. You
Mm.
really have to understand your strengths, your stressors, your blind spots, because what you need to do instead of trying to be everything to everybody, you need to figure out how you fill in those gaps. I mean, I was
Mhm.
actually thinking this morning about a meeting I had yesterday with a staff person. Um, Two of my gaps are routine and fine details. I'm just, as
Mhm.
try as I might, I make mistakes on little details. It's just, that's not one of my strengths. I have a team member who is excellent at both those things. And so I finally decided, I need to delegate some of this stuff that I've been doing that's frustrating to me to this person. And we met about it. And so it's like that. It's really taking a look at, where your strengths lie and how you can fill those gaps. Um, I think also good leaders, think about, how do you react to drama? How do you react to
Mm.
chaos? Um, how do you react to too many things going on? Equanimity, I find, is one of those things, staying calm in the face of chaos and
Mhm.
challenge and change. Your team are looking to you to set the tone, to set the culture. If you're flying off the handle in drama, then they are too. And, that does not, for good leadership, make. Um, what else? Good leaders care about people. There's a
Mm.
famous quote by Brene Brown. She says, if you don't care about and you can't connect with your people, you're never going to see performance.
Mm.
Good leaders have people's trust, and they feel, because they feel compassion for them, because they care about them. They know a little
Mhm.
about them. You can't just be off in the OR thinking all those people are, I hired them, they're just doing their jobs.
Mhm.
So those are some initial thoughts that come. There's a lot of other good things, things that good leaders do, but um,
Yeah.
I'll
I
pause.
think those are excellent. And, I think about the maybe it's the old school approach to kind of ruling with an iron fist, and it's just your job and you're all replaceable. And sadly, I've heard that repeated in practices, almost this ongoing threat, if you will, of well, you're all replaceable, including me. And
Yeah.
okay, sure, we are, right? I mean, the reality is, of course, every position is replaceable, but that's not creating that safe place to really perform your best. I think about, I'm not a clinical provider, but if I were, and I'm doing surgery and somebody's, leaning over my shoulder, trying to pick apart everything I'm doing or saying, if you're not good at this, we'll just find someone else. I'm probably not going to perform at my best. And so I like that Brene Brown quote and that example of, connecting with your team, showing them that you care for them and that There does have to be a little bit of a safe space to make small mistakes and learn from them and grow together.
Well, and I think a couple things based on what you're saying. One of them is I've had more than one surgical client over the years who doesn't have equanimity. And when things aren't good and that person is mad, they throw things. They throw charts, they throw pens. I mean, you talk about safety in a safe environment. This idea of psychological safety is something that's very important for leaders to cultivate. And, so you really got to think about that. And the other thing is about mistakes. You mentioned mistakes.
Mhm,
Good leaders are okay saying, I'm not the expert in this and I
mhm,
make mistakes. Those are two great qualities where, they're filling in the gaps because they're comfortable saying they don't know. But
mhm.
also when they make a mistake because they didn't know, they're willing to admit it. And that goes a long way and Brene Brown again, vulnerability is so key. And it's something that over the past 5 or 6 years has become a lot more prominent when we talk about leadership and leadership development. It's hard to be vulnerable and admit that you're not perfect. And I think
Mhm.
it's particularly hard for surgeons, for doctors of any kind, because
Right,
they were always like the top kid in school and getting into
exactly.
the best schools, right? So they have to be the best always and be infallible, but they're not. So
Mhm.
you've got to wear kind of a different hat when you're thinking about leadership than when you're in the OR or in the exam room with patients.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking, that self-awareness and honesty with where we have growth opportunities, we'll call them. But we can't be expected to be all things and to be perfect at all things, and that's a challenge for anybody who's a high performer who is aiming for perfection. I think it's to recognize we never achieve it, so there will always be room for growth, and it's okay. That's part of the journey. That's part of our growth process.
Yeah. And I want to say, I'll put my leadership coach hat on right now. All of you doctors listening right now, I give you permission. I give you permission not to be perfect and to just
Mhm,
try something. And if it doesn't work, it's okay.
mhm.
The world is not going to end in the case of leadership a decision, most likely in your office. It's different
Mhm.
in the clinical setting, but when it
Mhm.
comes to the organizational development, it's okay. You have permission to not be perfect every time.
So we have that example of that perfectionism. What are some common leadership challenges or other obstacles that you see surgeons and practice leaders facing?
Well, I think that one of the things that I hear more than anything from our clients is giving tough feedback. That is
Mm,
just lately, maybe that's just lately, the
sure.
physicians that I've been working with, they're asking about that. How do I give people feedback that's negative and do it in a way that is, effective? So
Mhm,
that's a challenge that comes up a lot. And we could do a whole video on feedback. We just can't
mhm.
address it here because it depends on the person's communication style and your comfort level. But what you don't want to do is that old school sandwich. They call it the sandwich technique, where you
Yeah.
say something nice and then in the middle you say something that needs the feedback, and then you close with something positive, because then of course the person never hears the constructive criticism. But so
Mhm,
feedback is a common challenge. I would say the other thing is I'm hearing is trying to sell your vision for culture, patient experience, organizational design, values, and ideas for growth
mhm,
without overwhelming your team. Like
mhm,
recently, I'm thinking of a client who recognized, kind of had a light bulb moment that, you know, you can't send an email to your team at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and task them with something because we're going to start something new. And then send an email at 11 and give them more information. And then the next morning, expect it to be done and on your desk by 11
mhm,
a.m. Like you've a leadership challenge is that you've got this team of people who's never going to see it from the owner's eyes, right? So you've
mhm,
got to find a way to be effective, bring them up, help them reach the goal and their own potential without overwhelming them and burning them out. And that's another, I would go into that burnout, having
mhm.
burned out managers. I think that's a real leadership challenge in
Yeah.
helping your manager not overwork your manager, not, creating an environment where your manager thrives and can stay relatively balanced, helping them set boundaries so that they don't burn out. Because then
Mhm.
who wants to be the doctor constantly having manager turnover? You like,
Right.
every year there's a new manager, and we both know surgeons like that, and
Yeah.
that's a leadership failure right there. So these are some of the challenges I think
Yeah.
that honestly, if leaders seek development or a mentor or coach, those are good things to address with somebody like that.
Yeah. And I do see that happen often, and it's easy in particularly small practices, which a lot of surgical practices are a small team, which
Mhm.
means the manager is wearing multiple hats. It also means the surgeon is wearing multiple hats,
Yeah,
sometimes the manager hat. And so, we pile on all of these responsibilities in day-to-day work. Plus, we have this expectation to be leaders and to create this great culture environment. And of course, we're not even talking about the patient experience side of things and
right.
how critical that is. And then we add this perfectionist layer on top of it, and it really is a recipe for burnout. And it's challenging, and I think it's okay to just stop and reflect that we're asking almost the impossible from any individual to wear all those hats and perform their best in all of those scenarios. And, I think also about the amount of things we're trying to accomplish at one time. So you gave the
Uh-huh.
example of a 3 p.m. email and then an 11 p.m. email and then a first thing the next day. Sometimes we're just trying to do too much.
Yeah.
And, I'm guilty of that. It's hard for
Yes.
me to slow
Me
down when I
too.
have an idea. I want to run with it. Honestly, because I'm probably going to forget about it if I wait too long. But we have to prioritize so we can do, and we would be better off if we could do fewer things better than trying to cram it all on at one time.
Yeah, and I have 2 thoughts about that. The first is, listening to you, this doctor that I worked with years ago, he was the founder of a healthcare technology company, which I was employee number 1 in for him, and that overwhelm I mean, it's a startup environment, which many of our clients, they're just getting going, right? It's like a startup tech company. There's a million things to do, competing priorities. But he used to sit me down when I'd be spinning out of control. Well, I gotta do this and this and this. And he would say, we are trying to push a huge boulder up a very tall hill. He goes, we can't do that in a day or a week or a month. So just let's sit down and figure out like what are the top 2 or 3 things that we have to get done this week. So
Mhm,
that's a really good strategy, I think. I mean, for him, he is still a great physician leader from that standpoint because you're right. The doing less is actually more, doing less is
mhm,
more because you can get more focused. I hear
mhm,
you talk a lot about that in your writing and with clients, how staying focused allows you to finish things. I mean, if we're
mhm,
just constantly putting out fires, that's very disruptive and frankly, you can't get things done as well as you could. And good leaders, I mean, there's Peter Drucker, who some people watching this video will know who he is, others won't, but he's a wonderful executive guru for decades. And in his book, The Effective Executive, which is a classic, he talks
mhm,
about managers needing to focus and doing less because that's how you really get things done.
mhm. Again, one of those challenges for the high achievers out there, but
Exactly.
something we can always work towards. So, for surgeons who want to become more intentional about building their leadership skills, where should they start?
Well, I like to start by asking people a question, which is think about some of the good leaders you've had in your lifetime.
Mhm,
It could have been the coach of your swim team or your football team, that kind of leader. Could be a business leader. And take a minute to write down what are 3 to 5 of the qualities that you really liked about that person and what you felt were effective. And once you do that, take a look and say, how am I doing in those areas? And that is like the kind of a simple self assessment to put you in a direction of, okay, I really need to be better about, I don't know anything about the last 2 people that I hire. I need to know a little more about them so that I can care about them, find out what they're about. How can I develop their skills if I really don't know much about people? So that's a simple self assessment. I think there are other self assessments, but you can do this on a piece of paper, what do I feel my leadership strengths are?
Mhm.
Where are my blind spots? What culture am I trying to build?
Mm.
That kind of self-assessment is a good start because that'll lead you then to, doing some reading, listening to some podcasts. I'm huge on well, as a firm, we are huge on learning, right? Constantly learning. There are 3 books I suggest to almost every coaching client that I have. I mentioned one, The Effective Executive by Peter Drucker, first published in 1967.
Oh,
It is a
wow.
classic book. It is an amazingly timely book. Um, Dare to Lead is another one by
Mhm.
Brene Brown. That's kind of a recent classic, modern classic. And then the third one is it's called Seven Habits of a Mindful Leader. And
Mm.
that really stretches people into a little bit more toward mindfulness, compassionate leadership. And uh, Mark Lesser is the one who wrote it. He was my executive coach for years, and he was the spiritual coach at Google for many
Oh,
years.
wow.
So yeah, and he happens to be a Buddhist priest. So he's got just this, and run several businesses. He's got an MBA. He's a Buddhist that has an MBA. So it's really an interesting mix. Um, so yeah, those 3 books are good. There's podcasts out there.
Yeah,
HBR, Harvard Business Review has one on leadership that's very good. Anything by Adam Grant. So I'd start by, you can start for free. Costs you nothing to start your
exactly.
leadership development is what I'm trying to say. And then maybe you're ready for a coach or a mentor or, something like that.
Yeah. I think that's excellent, and I love that you pointed out there are free places to start. There's content, there's so much that we can listen to and read, but honestly, just starting with that self-reflection, and thinking about those strong leaders in your life, and what are those qualities and characteristics that were so inspiring, and
Mhm.
how can I start applying that today, in my own situation? So, I think for me that takeaway is start somewhere, and you don't have to attend this whole program or course or
Right.
finish reading a book or like have this like master plan in place. Just start with the little things every day.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that. I probably should have started with that to say you don't have to seek out a leadership course as the first thing because you
Mhm.
really should go inside first and all these things you want to tease out. And I'll just add to that as one more thing. You've got this team of people, and this is the team that you want to nurture, right? You're trying to
Mhm.
raise their potential. So there's 2 simple questions you can ask them. Maybe some of your key people, not everybody, but certainly your manager, patient care coordinator, maybe the nurse that's in the OR with you.
Mhm.
Um, how can I better support you and
Mhm.
your personal and professional growth? And what would you like to see more of from me?
Mhm.
What would you like to see more of from me? And I think the answers might really surprise people and point you in a good direction as a leader and as somebody who's building a team.
I love that. I love that so much. Well, that's all the time we have today. Always love talking to you. I leave feeling inspired, and I know our clients who work with you on their own leadership journey feel the same way. So, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking about leadership, always such a great and necessary topic.
All right. Until next time.